The Art of Intervention, a practical approach to intervening with a reluctant addict or alcoholic. Now, this brief slide presentation is meant only as an overview of the process, not a guide to a full intervention. For that, you'll need help from a professional counselor, or you'll need to employ information found elsewhere on this site or through reading the books listed in the bibliography. Remember, the goal of an intervention is not to take the choice away from the alcoholic. Instead, it's to influence that choice towards treatment and away from continued drinking and drug use. The key to intervention lies in what happens before you confront the addict. It's in the preparation, the groundwork. Like the scouts say, be prepared. It correlates directly with successful outcome. What is intervention? An organized, structured team attempt to convince somebody to choose treatment. Emphasis there is on team. A group seems to be more effective than an individual expressing his or her opinion. Now, intervention can and does take many varied forms. Examples can be found in the intervention guide on this site or in books in the bibliography. But I can't overemphasize the importance of a group effort rather than relying on any individual's single opinion. Intervention preparation begins with a question. Now, it might be a different question than the one you've been contemplating. Instead of what do I say to convince the alcoholic to seek treatment, we ask, why isn't he or she in treatment already? Because in many respects, that's the real mystery. Despite the many consequences related to drinking or drug use, why is it so difficult to convince somebody to seek help? The answer lies in part with the motivation curve that appears during the progression of addiction. In the early stages of drinking or drug use, the addict experiences few problems and many rewards associated with substance use. It makes you feel good. It relaxes you. You can quickly regain control if you overdrink on some occasion, and it's socially acceptable depending on your peer group. Now, as time passes, the nature of addiction is for that to change. Problems increase, rewards decrease. At some point, the addict is going to have more problems related to drinking or drug use than rewards. So why isn't this suffering enough to motivate a desire for change, even in the most extreme cases where it adversely affects nearly every phase of the addict's life? Well, the answer is there are powerful barriers in the way. Three main types. First, psychological defenses such as denial and rationalizing. These exist in all of us as a way of unconsciously reducing anxiety. We simply don't see certain aspects of reality that we find fearful or unpleasant. In addiction, this is raised to a pathological level. Stigma is the social disapproval of alcohol or drug addiction, which we find in our society. Enabling is a more complex phenomenon and reflects the behavior of other people who respond to the problems caused by addiction. We'll start with those principal defenses. Denial is an inability to accurately perceive some aspect of the problem. Rationalizing is coming up with irrational reasons or excuses for alcoholic behavior. Externalizing is blaming it on outside forces or circumstances, such as other people. Minimizing is discounting the importance or significance of the problems related to drinking or drug use. And intellectualizing is picayune disputes over definitions or terms as a way of distracting from the larger issue. All of these defenses exist below the addict's awareness. He or she may lie to us, but most of the real deception is self-deception. The addict doesn't realize how problematic drinking or drug use has become to them. So our first goal in intervention is to improve the team's ability to deal with these defenses that we're invariably going to hear when we sit down to confront the addict. The second barrier is stigma. Definition: severe social disapproval of a trait, behavior, or belief. In this case, alcoholism or drug dependence. Stigma converts a diagnosis into an accusation. The doctor may say, well, I think you may be an alcoholic, but what the alcoholic hears on an emotional level may be something like, you're weak, you're a failure, you're immoral, you're irresponsible. Not hard to understand why people get angry. So our second goal is to provide an antidote for stigma in the form of support and encouragement from people who care about the alcoholic, us. The third barrier, and the most important, is enabling, which springs from the natural tendency that we all have to respond to the problems addiction causes with protective or rescuing behavior. Some of us will even find ourselves in the role of primary enabler, a person who is so important to continue drinking or drug use that the alcoholic, in some respects, can't keep going without their help. These folks, in turn, can become a key to intervention if they can be motivated towards treatment rather than continued enabling. Now, why do primary enablers fall into this behavioral trap? Usually springs from, well, one, the fear of consequences. You'll hear someone say, if I stop protecting him, won't something terrible happen? And that's followed closely by guilt, and then wouldn't it be my fault? And other people would disapprove of me. Of course, some of us just have a greater need for control than others. Now, in reality, we all know on some level that we can't really control another person. But does that stop us from trying? Not often. And sometimes the enabler simply can't find an acceptable path through unacceptable options and is in the grip of a terrible indecision. So our third goal is to identify these primary enablers and alter the enabling behavior enough to promote motivation for change rather than continued addiction. Excuse me. Now, intervention makes use of two tools, leverage and credibility. Leverage is simply a term for our ability as a team to tip the decision of the alcoholic in favor of treatment and away from continued use. Credibility is the answer to the question, will the alcoholic believe that we mean what we say when we say change must come and must come soon? Leverage consists of incentives, as in, if you, the alcoholic, will do A, such as go to a treatment program, I will support you by doing B, which you will benefit from. Consequences would be something along the lines of, if you refuse treatment, I will be forced to respond by doing X, Y, or Z, which presumably you won't like. Hint, the fear of losing something we have is always stronger than the attraction of gaining something new. It's called loss aversion. So alcoholics are often motivated to enter treatment because of the threat of losing something that's precious to them, rather than a real faith on their part that they're going to feel better. Now, credibility is believability. When we say we're going to do something, does the alcoholic or addict believe us? Many of us have lost some of our credibility by making promises or issuing threats that we didn't carry through on. As a result, the addict may have stopped listening to us. That's one reason for a team approach. A consensus of several people the alcoholic cares about has far more credibility than anyone's individual opinion, unless, of course, that person is wearing black robes and isn't in a courtroom, but that's probably not the case. Now, when you prepare for an actual intervention session, you follow these broad steps. There's some variation in there, but this is a broad outline. You begin by evaluating the problem. Ask yourself, what are the likely defenses that we're going to see? In the early stages of addiction, a young alcoholic may already be experiencing problems, but will object that he isn't bad enough yet. It's too early for me to consider quitting drinking. I'm too young. I haven't had that many problems. When I do have a problem, when I do lose control, I'm able to reassert my control through willpower. Therefore, I don't need treatment. In the middle stages of addiction, you're likely to hear those very exaggerated defenses, the denial, the rationalizing, the blaming. In the later stages of addiction, when you confront an alcoholic, you may be dealing with an intellectual deficit, a cognitive thinking deficit related to long-term drinking or drug use. The approach to intervening changes somewhat based on what stage the addict is in. Now, it's also important to assemble the right team. 3 to 6 people who have leverage, and those generally are those primary enablers, and or influence, meaning someone with whom the alcoholic has a trust relationship. May not necessarily be a close one, but somebody with whom he or she is not actively in conflict and who can be in a position to provide strong, positive encouragement to seek help. We want to identify the available leverage, which will be used to improve our chances of getting a decision that's favorable for treatment, and assess our credibility. Do we need to take steps to improve our believability with the addict or the alcoholic prior to the intervention itself? It's always helpful to make behavior changes to support intervention. Particularly those primary enablers can make small changes that help solidify the ground under which we'll conduct the intervention and make us more credible. Part of intervention preparation is to explore and select treatment options. Our definition would be that good treatment is effective, meaning it's likely to work for our alcoholic. It's accessible, meaning we can get that person into the program, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, and it's affordable. We don't believe that you should go broke trying to find treatment for people. There are affordable options. Now, preparing evidence statements, what intervention really consists of is a presentation of facts that are designed to overcome the alcoholic's defense mechanisms. And each of us will have evidence statements that we will read or recite or refer to during the actual intervention itself. These evidence statements represent a mirror that we're going to hold up in front of the alcoholic that more accurately reflects the extent and severity of the addiction, to replace the distorted mirror that the addict usually has developed. Now, we can anticipate objections to going to treatment because we've probably already heard them. If they've worked, they've been successful so far, it's unlikely the addict will bother to change them. So we can prepare an answer which is effective. Borrowed from negotiation, most intervention teams have a fallback position. Suppose, despite all our encouragement, the addict says, "No, I'm not going to go to treatment." Is there a lesser level of agreement that we can seek? Say, for example, instead of going to that 30-day program, you'll go to intensive outpatient. And in the event that you fail there, that you start drinking again or using drugs or you drop out, you agree in advance to go to the 30-day program we recommended in the first place. This is simply a negotiation technique that often makes a big difference with a terrifically resistant addict or alcoholic. And we rehearse. Rehearsal with one person playing the role of the reluctant addict is a chance for us to see where our strengths or weaknesses are in terms of the presentation that we're going to make during the intervention. Some people, for example, are just too emotional. They're too easily upset or they get angry to participate in an intervention. And in that case, we may have them write out a simple statement which someone else who's in maybe better control will read during the intervention, so that the impact is still there, but we don't risk an emotional incident that will distract from the message, the larger message of the intervention. Intervention, and let me emphasize this, is ordinarily a very positive, supportive, loving experience, not just for the alcoholic or addict, but for the people who are intervening. A reminder, not every addict or alcoholic is the same. Different people respond to different approaches. For instance, we can divide certain addicts into tortoise versus hare in terms of their presentation during the intervention. Now, I heard a psychologist use this illustration in discussing his eating disorders patients, and I thought it applied pretty well to intervention as well. There are certain people who respond to confrontation about addiction by going into a shell like a tortoise. They become passive, resistant. They'll avoid engagement, maybe refuse to discuss issues, refuse to respond. The message they're sending us is, you can't really make me do anything, and I'm just going to sit here and listen if I have to, but I will make no commitments, the hope being that we'll give up and go away. Others may respond the way the hare would. They're very dramatic, prone to flight, might get upset, burst into tears, have a temper tantrum, create a lot of chaos, emotional, dramatic chaos that's designed to scare us off and convince us somehow that this person is just too emotionally fragile for treatment. Now, that's never true. Nonetheless, it's a classic defense. Most interventions are somewhere in between, but it's good to prepare for the extremes as well. A last word that we use in most of our slide presentations. Recovery is learned. It's a new set of skills that we need to deal with this very challenging disorder. And the more we practice those skills, the better we get at using them.